Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and figures of the Warhammer 40k universe. Today, we shall discuss a figure that is long gone, but seldom lamented as others are, despite his import to the entire setting. You will bump into the mention of this character frequently and regularly, so I thought it might be a good idea to shed just a little light on the subject, the person of Malcador the Sigillite, or Malcador the Hero. But please do bear in mind that this is an introduction only. One day I shall get into the full splendour and power of this enigmatic figure, who quite literally contributed to the formation of the Imperium more than any other figure except the Emperor of Mankind himself. So, who was he? Where did he come from? How and why did he pass into history? For the answers to this, we go all of the way back to the very birth of the Imperium, to the Unification Wars, and on to that most horrific of all confrontations, the Horus Heresy. Today, we go back in time some 11,000 years from the current setting, and discuss the only confidant, ally, and friend the Master of Mankind ever had, Malcador the Sigillite. When the Emperor arose to reunite humanity, and started with a brutal military campaign across Old Earth, now called Terra, Malcador was said to be with him. His emblem being the letter I that is so known and feared across the Imperium even to the times of the Grim Darkness, but we shall go into the why of that in due course. A psyker of prodigious power. A psychic who can funnel and bend the warp to his will, second only to the Emperor, and perhaps, just perhaps, Magnus the Red, the Primarch of the Thousand Suns. He was known to be ancient when the Unification Wars raged, and he stood at the Emperor's side even then, even before he was the Emperor of Mankind, and was merely viewed as yet another techno-barbarian tyrant. So powerful was Malcador that he once hid a whole moon, firstly from the warp, and then within it, but always keeping it shielded from the corrupting powers contained therein. Malcador was ever at the Emperor's side, like a shadow, always listening, always advising. It is touted that he was the person who persuaded his ally, his friend, to take the name, and everything that went with it, of being the Emperor of Mankind. He assisted in the direction of the Primarch project, the self-same experiment that created the Lords of the 20 Legions of Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines. He was the Emperor's go-to and regent at need. Never had the Emperor trusted any as he did Malcador, more even than any of his genetic sons, the Primarchs. Malcador is the one who many of the Primarchs called Uncle, so involved was he in their lives and the running of the Imperium. Braham al-Kadur was another name he was known by. He always appeared as an old man with the bearing of a priest or holy man, who professed to be the last of the Sigillites, an ancient human order whose purpose was to locate and collect as much of the heritage and history of humanity as was possible. Supposedly the guardians of all artifacts and objets d'art of antiquity, it is attested that Malcador's chambers in the Imperial Palace were replete with such items. He is also recorded to have sent fighting forces to collect the Rosetta Stone, to attest to this ongoing work of his, if not his orders. There are many a rumour about his origins, ranging from being sensei, a relative of the Emperor, to either a relative or actually the one remaining shaman. But for this nuance, I will wait until I perform an introduction to the Master of Mankind, the Emperor. It can get a bit complicated. But there is no certainty in this regard, any of it. Malcador is said to have stated he was over 6,000 years old, but on the other hand, he did age, so could not have been a perpetual, or not the way we know them. The discussions, while bracing, are often circular. Sometimes, as with all mysteries, it is best to simply shrug and accept that which is than attempt to always seek to pigeonhole. Whatever his genesis, Malcador was the only person in all of the history of the Warhammer setting to have been said to have been a friend of the Emperor. Although Horus might have been his closest son, his protégé, he was still his son, and thus never on the kind of terms with the Emperor that Malcador was. In more recent tracks, the relationship has been developed more, and the importance of Malcador developed further. When one now looks at the huge sprawling drama that is the Horus Heresy, Malcador is ever present. But more than this. When I get to the end, I shall discuss what I consider his most important action in all of that period. Soon. During the Great Crusade, Malcador was often left behind to run the shop, so to put it, but he was present at many of the crux points that led to the heresy. He was present at the humbling of Lorgar and his word-bearers on Monarchia, acting on behalf of the Emperor, and with Reboot Guilliman and his Ultramarines in attendance. At that confrontation he was even struck fully on the face by the Primarch Lorgar. Despite being knocked many meters back, he did survive, and in such condition as he was able to stand and then psychically summon the Master of Mankind. So the statement he was merely a man is another hotly contended factor by the old ghoul fans of the setting, like myself. When the Emperor was indisposed due to having to sit on the Golden Throne to wage his war within the Webway, it was Malcador that was left in charge of the Imperium, until the dark days of the Siege of Terra at least, where the rulership depended purely on the survival of the palace and Emperor, and command was finally ceded to the Primarchs Rogel Dawn, Sanguinius, and Yagatai. When the Emperor chose a person to search the entire galaxy and all of humanity that remained loyal for souls that were incorruptible, it was Malcador he sent. Thus it was that Malcador succeeded and brought back both human, mortal men and utterly loyal Marines. In this way, on this one quest, he collected the core of what would become the Grey Knights chapter of Space Marines, and also the Inquisition. The Inquisition still use his symbol, for that reason that his sigil is still a thing of terror. More than this, it was Malcador that was the first Lord of Terror. He was the person who formed and then led the Council of Humans that was requested, again, by the Emperor. When the Emperor was not present, he was invested with all of the authority and power of the Master of Mankind, and none, not even a Primarch, not even Horus Lupercal, the War Master, could gainsay him in any and all of his decisions. To truly drive home how important this man was, it must be stated that there are well-supported theories he was also construed as being the responsible for the death of 3 Primarchs out of 20. You see, Malcador set up the Officio Assassinorum, the wet workers or assassins of the Imperium. It is abject fact that it was an assassin that took the life of Conrad Kurz, the Primarch of the Night Lords, despite the fact he did not resist whatsoever, and actually permitted it. But on Malcador's throne, in the picture you are seeing now, there are 2 numbers. Unless Games Workshop are having a jolly, which does happen, it is a very dark portrait indeed, for the Primarchs of the 2nd and 11th Legions were both killed before the Horus Heresy. Some suggest that the picture is a blatant signal that it was Malcador, or more likely his assassins, that ended the Lost Primarchs. It is an official picture from Games Workshop, you see, but as we mentioned, they can be rascals at times. We now know the very basics of who he was, if no certainty of where he came from. So let us move on. Why is he not in the present setting, despite the time between? Simple. He sacrificed himself. The forces of Horus Lupercal, the War Master turned traitor and champion of chaos, had finally reached the birthplace of humanity and the residence of the Emperor, Holy Terror itself. Horus had near half of the Imperium's armies with him, including a massive force of not only Adeptus Astartes, but also their godlike fathers, who many of which had been elevated to demon princes, the traitor Primarchs, against whom stood only 3 Primarchs and their men. His intent was to end the war by invading the palace and taking the very head of the Emperor himself. While this was all going on, the planetary bombarded and then invaded by the traitors and all of the legions of the Dark Gods. The Emperor was waging a war in the sub-pocket of reality known as the Webway. We will get into this nuance at another time, but just know that every ounce of the Emperor's power was utilized in this terrible battle. For if Chaos pushed the Emperor and his forces back, then they could gain access to the doorway into the real world that was in the palace itself. In the final day of the Siege of Terra, the War Master dropped the shields on his ship, the Vengeful Spirit, an invitation to the Emperor to teleport up and decide the matter mano a mano. The Emperor could not refuse the opportunity, but he could not leave the webway unattended, the doorway undefended. Thus it was that Malcador, as the only psyker potent enough and person trusted enough, was asked to take the place of the Emperor on the Golden Throne, a request that Malcador performed without hesitation, despite the fact that he knew it would be his doom. A dark day. For in scant hours the battle between the Emperor and his son had been concluded, and Horus was defeated and slain. Yet the Emperor had been destroyed, his body broken, and his power fading. When he was carried back into the throne room by the Primarch Rogel Dawn, Malcador was taken from the throne before the Emperor could be installed. The strain on Malcador's mind had been bearable, but only just. But the strain on his body had been too much. The exertion of channeling that much raw power had burnt away his form to the level where survival was not possible. His light had burned so very, very brightly, you see. So, in his last act of sacrifice, not for a god, not for an emperor, not for a liege, not even for a savior, but for a friend, his only friend, Malcador gifted the very last of his power, the last of his very soul, to the Emperor to buoy him up and help him to last. In that instant the Emperor awoke for the last time and gave his last verbal edict that Malcador should henceforth be only known as Malcador the Hero. With that, Malcador's body finally gave in and literally blew away on the wind, the last of it so badly spent that it seemed to break down on the cellular level. An utter hero, correct? Well, here is where we go slightly off script again, and into the realms of wild and terrible speculation. Sorry, but it's Monday, why not? For I have a very different view of Malcador as some others, not wildly different in actions, but utterly divergent in ramifications. For I presently see Malcador as being one of the few people directly responsible for the Horus Heresy. Stick with me, and let me show you what I mean. But briefly, this is only an introduction after all. It goes back to a very simple and short segment that showed the reaction of the Primarchs to the formation of the Council of Terror and the removal of a statue of all things. You see, the Primarchs felt that they were the sons of the Emperor and were literally born to the purple. In their minds, their rule of the legions of Space Marines and the armies of humans that went with them were actually just so, because they were the most important events and efforts in the emerging Imperium. Many of them would muse on what they would be tasked to do when the galaxy had been conquered and the crusade had been won. So likely did it seem to be a reality. Most of them took what they thought was the logical step and envisaged that they would go from being war leaders and generals to being governors and leaders in peace. Horus most of all, it would seem, for his reaction to the formation of the Council of Terror was explosive, but it was also linked to another very charged situation, the removal of a statue from the investiry. The formation of the Council of Terror was like a thunderbolt to Horus and his like-minded brethren. It was a council of mere humans led by Uncle Malcador, who despite his powers the Primarch saw as very frail and oh so human. But this one move ordered by the Emperor was the spark, For it meant that the Primarchs were not to be a new race of nobility to rule over humanity. It meant to some of them that they were only generals, only warriors. Some went on to then extrapolate and believe that it meant more. It meant that they were as much weapons as the ships or firearms or armor that they themselves used. It meant there could be a time when they were not needed, and their future was thus in doubt. To add insult to injury, in the mind of Horus, one of the first actions of this council of mere mortals was a direct attack on the authority and persons of the Primarchs. How? In the Investory, a huge hall in the Emperor's palace, were 20 statues, one for each of the Primarchs. Okay, Alferis and Omegon fans, there's still only one statue, okay? Let's keep these simple. As discussed, 2 of the Primarchs, the Lords of the 2nd Legion and that of the 11th, had already died. I think in this case it was the 2nd, but cannot be certain. Either way, Horus, Yagatai and Alfarius, of all people, took great truck with the plans of the council. Obviously, they had been discerned by Alfarius, despite the council trying to keep them secret, for it had been decided that the statue of the Primarch who had fallen, and done so in bad standing, was to be torn down. Horus confronted his uncle Malcador about this, forcefully. When it was confirmed by Malcador that this was indeed to occur, Horus blazed at him that it wiped away the bad, but it also wiped away all of the achievements of that Primarch and the sacrifices of all of his legion. Horus was disgusted that his brother could be treated this way, to have his existence simply erased. More than this, he felt that Malcador was behind this action, not his own father, the Emperor. Malcador was actually threatened by Horus, but more his standing, his power, for Horus was going to speak the name of his brother in direct contravention of the diktat of the Emperor. Thus did Malcador display his power again, and with a swift signal and the force of his mind, he held Horus in place and near killed him. Malcador did threaten the destruction of Horus Lupercal, the Emperor's undisputed favourite son, there and then. He stated he would unmake him. Some say that it was only the intervention of Alfarius and Yagatai imploring the Sigillite that saved their older brother. Malcador went on to explain that humanity needed to be ruled by humans, as this was the goal and the wish of their father, the Emperor, that the Primarchs could never truly understand the human condition. So how on earth, in all of the galaxy, could they rule over those that they could not even associate with? The confrontation ended with Horus released, and Malcador instructing them to return to the crusade. But in this instant, this one confrontation, in my opinion, the Horus Heresy truly began. Warriors talk like warriors and act like warriors. All is confrontation, threat and consequences. So Malcador reacted like a challenged regent, like an adult in the face of a child, as he did indeed call Horus boy, like an authority against a supplicant, but he did not react to the reason. He treated Horus like a child, is what he believed, but he did not. He treated Horus like an irrelevance. In my mind, if Malcador had truly treated Horus as a child, then he may well have averted the Horus Heresy. He would have seen a lost boy, a treasured son, who was scared of being supplanted, scared of being forgotten. Horus blazed at the removal of the statue of his brother for one reason, I think. He was just saying one line to Malcador. If you can do that to him, you can do that to me. And Malcador could have reacted better. He could have actually acted like an uncle instead of a regent. He could have said anything, but let us just say he said this. I, Horus, but your brother was disloyal. The memory of all who remain loyal will be so until the end of times. Horus, you have nothing to fear. You are the most loyal of all of the sons of the Emperor, and now know the result, a rebellion. It could never be you. Perhaps a bit gushy, perhaps a bit touchy-feely, but could it have averted what happened next? Maybe. Instead, Malcador overpowered Horus, made him feel even weaker, did so in front of mere mortals in their presence. He unmanned the leader of the Primarchs. He beat him down. In every possible way except by shouting it with actual words, he signaled to Horus Lupercal that they were not special, that they were not fixed points in the Imperium. They could be replaced and forgotten. And they were not the masters of humanity, but its attack dogs. No matter how it was dressed up, they were not, and never would be, human. Lore states the Sanguinius knew he would die on the vengeful spirit, knew Horus would kill him, but also knew that the tiny slither of damage he could cause to the armor and protections of Horus would then allow his father, the Emperor, to defeat the arch-traitor. Sometimes victory or defeat resides in the tiniest of chinks in armor. When Malcador sent Horus off with his tail between his legs, he smashed the armor of certainty, place, belonging, and worth that the Emperor had surrounded Horus in all of his adult life since he was found. Malcador created the chink in the armor that was the doorway to the whispers of the dark gods. He burst the bubble and broke the dream, the enchantment, and took away the only armor that Horus had against such blandishments and the temptations of evil, as he did not even know they existed. Malcador robbed Horus of his confidence, and by doing so, he set the galaxy onto the pathway to the most horrific, most brutal, and most costly war that the human race has ever known and has never recovered from. For when Horus left the throne room, he did so with a fire in his belly, the beginnings of the spark of rebellion. He invested energy in gaining information about his uncle Malcador, and, to quote, according to Yagatai Khan, the true identity of Malcador was discovered by Horus. Horus told the Khan that Malcador's original name was Raham al-Kadur, a perpetual known as Cursed Wanderer. The Khan went on to say Raham al-Kadur had committed great atrocities during Old Night. End quote. But by either being allowed to believe Malcador was evil from the words of others, or by actually finding out the shady history of this person, we may never know. But the upshot was simple. Malcador, Uncle Malcador, was not as shining a beacon as he had been led to believe, and thus, by proxy, nor could Horus's faultless father any more be considered thus as well, for look at the company he kept. The Horus Heresy is put at the feet of many, often exclusively, but of course it is never that simple. The Heresy, the fall from grace, had many causes and many puppeteers involved and many players. I am just saying that when the list of those who could be blamed is drawn up, let us never forget that fateful feud, that one instant, and let us have good old Uncle Malcador on there as well, on that list. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.